everything changed in one shocking moment, a moment no one inside Westminster saw coming. A moment when the calm, steady voice of King Charles suddenly cut through the chaos of live television and stopped Prime Minister Keir Starmer in his tracks. What followed sent shockwaves through the entire nation, a final royal warning so powerful, so unexpected, that the UK erupted within minutes. This wasn't politics, this wasn't ceremony, this was a line in the sand, drawn by the King himself. The tension inside the studio was already thick, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what happened next. Keir Starmer was speaking confidently, defending his latest policies, answering tough questions, and trying to project strength at a moment when the country felt increasingly divided. Cameras rolled, analysts whispered, viewers watched from every corner of the UK. Then, without warning, a royal communique arrived, not whispered behind palace walls, not filtered through government aides, but delivered directly to be read aloud, live, in real time. A message carrying the unmistakable authority of the crown. The moment the presenter paused, the room froze. She looked down at the card in her hand, her voice trembling, as she announced that Buckingham Palace had issued an immediate statement. Starmer's expression shifted instantly. The confidence he held seconds ago drained from his face. He leaned forward, eyebrows tight, realising this was not routine, not symbolic, and certainly not planned. The silence in the studio felt heavy, as if the entire building was holding its breath. The King's message began with calm but unmistakable firmness. He spoke of a moment of dangerous national instability, of decisions made without transparency, and of growing public unrest that can no longer be ignored. These were words no Prime Minister ever wants to hear from the monarch. Not in private, and certainly not on live broadcast. Starmer's eyes widened as the presenter continued reading. The King warned that trust between the public and its leaders had reached a breaking point, and that the government had a responsibility to act before the situation spiralled beyond control. But then came the line that detonated across the nation. The time has arrived, the King wrote, for immediate reflection, accountability and reconsideration at the highest level of leadership. That sentence, that single, carefully chosen royal sentence, hit like thunder. Viewers watching from home erupted on social media. Commentators in the studio exchanged stunned glances. Even government officials present at the broadcast scrambled for their phones, attempting to understand what this meant. Was this a rebuke, a warning, a demand? Starmer tried to respond, but every word he attempted felt forced, shaky, hollow. The entire broadcast shifted from a normal political interview into something historic, surreal, almost cinematic. The Prime Minister insisted he remained fully committed to serving the country, but his voice no longer echoed with certainty. The King's message had landed directly in the heart of the debate, and for the first time that night, Starmer seemed unable to steer the direction of the conversation. Outside the studio, the public reaction grew louder by the second. Crowds gathered, chants rising in city centres, people shouting that the King had finally said what millions had been thinking. The warning had ignited long, simmering anger. Every radio, every newspaper, every phone screen lit up with the same question. Had the King finally stepped in because the government had lost control? Analysts scrambled to interpret the message, while insiders whispered that this was no spontaneous act. It was a sign that pressure inside the palace had been building for weeks. And through it all, Starmer sat frozen beneath the harsh studio lights, knowing that his next move would be watched not just by the public, not just by his critics, but by the monarchy itself. A crossroads had opened and the country could feel it. What happened after the broadcast was even more explosive than the moment itself. Within minutes, the clip of the presenter reading the King's warning spread across the internet like wildfire. The entire country was suddenly locked onto one shocking question. Why would King Charles intervene so directly, and why now? As the footage circulated, analysts replayed every syllable, searching for hidden meaning. Some said the King was expressing deep concern for the nation's unity. Others said it was a subtle but unmistakable demand for leadership changes at the highest level. And in homes across Britain, people sat stunned, watching history unfold in real time. Downing Street reacted instantly. Senior advisors and cabinet members rushed into emergency meetings, desperately trying to control the growing panic. They argued over strategy, over wording, over how to respond to a message that felt impossible to spin. The king had spoken publicly, clearly, and with unprecedented urgency. Any attempt to brush it aside would only make things worse. Government aides whispered that this was the nightmare scenario, the moment when even loyal supporters began to question whether Starmer could still command the trust of the nation. Inside the palace, however, the mood was different, still calm, still disciplined, but undeniably serious. Sources close to royal staff spoke of weeks of concern, private reports sent to both Downing Street and constitutional advisors, and repeated warnings about rising public frustration. None of those earlier messages had slowed the escalating tension across the country. This time, the king had chosen not to rely on quiet diplomacy. This time, his words were meant to be heard by everyone. Meanwhile, the streets outside London grew louder by the hour. People gathered not because they were organised, but because they felt something had snapped. A line crossed, a moment too big to ignore. Placards lifted, voices rose, and chants echoed across city squares, demanding answers. Some demanded accountability, others demanded clarity. Many demanded immediate change. It felt as though the entire nation had stepped into a new phase of political crisis, pushed forward by a single royal warning that none of them saw coming. Members of Parliament scrambled to issue statements. Opposition leaders declared that the King's intervention showed just how unstable the government had become. Even some within Starmer's own party began asking for urgent meetings, worried that the Prime Minister's political footing was slipping faster than anyone realised. Journalists outside Westminster described the atmosphere as electric and dangerous, a strange combination of constitutional caution and public fury all swirling into one unstoppable storm. Inside the government, Starmer tried to regain control. He summoned his closest advisors, demanding a strategy that would calm the nation and neutralise the royal warning. But every plan they proposed seemed hopelessly weak. If he ignored the king, he would appear reckless. If he responded directly, he risked looking intimidated. And if he attempted to confront the message head-on, he risked deepening the crisis, no matter what path he considered. The pressure only intensified. Then came the second shock of the night. Senior officials confirmed that Buckingham Palace had requested a private meeting with Starmer as soon as possible. That phrase, vague, urgent, and unmistakably authoritative, hit Downing Street like a second wave of thunder. Such a request was not normal, not routine, and certainly not something that could be taken lightly. It meant the king wanted answers, it meant the palace expected action, and it meant the crisis was no longer just political. It had become constitutional. Inside the corridors of power, rumours spread rapidly. Some claimed the king was preparing an even stronger message if the crisis escalated. Others said royal advisors believed the government had already lost the confidence of the nation. No one knew where the truth lay, but every whisper added to the growing panic. Britain was on edge, and every second felt like a countdown to something even bigger. And through all of this, one image replayed endlessly across television screens and mobile phones. Starmer sitting under the studio lights, stunned, frozen, and visibly shaken as the king's final warning echoed out across the nation. It was the moment that defined the crisis. And it was only the beginning. As dawn approached, the crisis entered a new and even more dangerous phase. The nation had barely processed the king's first warning when a second wave of political shock hit Westminster. Leaks began to pour out from inside Downing Street. Anonymous aides, restless ministers, and panicked officials, all whispering that the situation was far worse than anyone outside realised. Reports suggested that Starmer's inner circle was fractured, divided between those urging him to confront the crisis head-on and those urging him to step back before the situation spiralled beyond recovery. Every leak fed the fire, and by early morning, the whole country was buzzing with rumours of a government on the verge of collapse. The pressure was so intense that Starmer himself barely slept. His advisors described him pacing through the corridors, replaying the king's message again and again, searching for some hidden angle he could use to regain control. But the truth was unavoidable. A royal warning delivered live in front of millions of viewers was a blow unlike anything a modern Prime Minister had faced. No speech, No interview, no carefully crafted statement could erase the impact of that moment. The footage was everywhere, on phones, on televisions, on every social media feed, capturing the exact second Starmer realised that the palace had turned its attention directly toward him. Meanwhile, the streets outside Westminster grew even more volatile. What began as scattered gatherings transformed into mass crowds pushing against barriers, demanding explanations from both the government and the monarchy. Some carried signs praising the king for stepping in. Others warned that the political system itself was starting to crack under the weight of public anger. Police were deployed in large numbers, but even they admitted privately that the mood of the crowd was shifting quickly and dangerously. Inside Parliament, MPs rushed in early, gathering in tight clusters, whispering urgently, exchanging notes, sharing rumours. Every hallway, every office, every committee room buzzed with speculation. Some senior figures argued that Starmer should make a public address immediately, calling for calm and explaining the situation. Others insisted that speaking now would only deepen the chaos, suggesting he wait until after the urgent meeting with the king. But the one thing they all agreed on: the political landscape had changed overnight and there was no going back. Then came a revelation that shook Westminster even further. Royal sources, speaking carefully but unmistakably, hinted that the King's message had been drafted only after weeks of growing concern. Confidential briefings from across the country had warned of public dissatisfaction reaching boiling point. And reports suggested that key advisors had urged the king to take a stronger stance to stabilise the national mood. The message delivered on live broadcasts was not impulsive. It was deliberate, measured, planned. And that knowledge sent a chill through every corner of government. As the morning progressed, news networks replayed new angles, new commentary, new analysis. Experts dissected the constitutional meaning of the King's intervention. Was it simply a warning, a plea for unity, or something far more serious? A signal that the monarchy believed the current leadership had lost the confidence of the people. Every interpretation sparked new waves of debate, new speculation, new headlines predicting outcomes that grew more dramatic by the hour. Starmer's team attempted to craft a response, but every draft fell apart under scrutiny. Some advisors urged him to apologise to the public and promise immediate reforms. Others insisted he take a firmer line, arguing that acknowledging the King's warning too directly would look like weakness. But the one path no one dared to recommend was confrontation. Even Starmer knew that challenging the palace in such a moment would be political suicide. The royal warning had become a moral benchmark for the nation, and he was now standing on the wrong side of it. As the clock approached midday, a new development sent shockwaves through the political world once again. Multiple MPs, including some from Starmer's own party, confirmed they were considering calls for an internal leadership review. They insisted it was not rebellion, not mutiny, but responsibility to the nation. Yet everyone understood what it truly meant. The Prime Minister's foundation had cracked, and the world was watching. Across Britain, millions waited for Starmer's next move. Would he address the nation? Would he confront the crisis? Would he step aside? The tension felt suffocating, a deep national silence where everyone held their breath at once, because at any moment, a single announcement could reshape the future of the country and determine whether the King's final warning would remain just a warning or evolve into something far more historic. By midday, the crisis had reached a boiling point. Every major network went into continuous coverage, broadcasting live shots of Westminster, Buckingham Palace, and angry crowds forming in cities across the UK. The tension was suffocating. People weren't simply waiting for news. They were bracing for it. Something huge was coming, and everyone could feel it. Rumours swirled like smoke. Secret briefings, panicked phone calls, political alliances crumbling behind closed doors. For the first time in his leadership, Starmer found himself cornered by forces he could no longer control. Public pressure on one side, royal authority on the other, and his own party quietly stepping back from him. Inside Downing Street, the situation was chaotic. Advisors huddled in small groups, whispering at a frantic pace. Some argued that Starmer must go to the palace immediately, even before the scheduled meeting, to show respect and regain stability. Others insisted he wait until the roads were secure, warning that the crowds outside could become unpredictable. But there was a deeper fear, unspoken yet painfully obvious. What if the king's second warning was ready to be released? What if the monarchy felt the crisis had reached the point where a stronger message was necessary? That fear grew when a leaked memo began circulating among journalists. A memo suggesting the palace had prepared additional guidance should the situation deteriorate further. No one knew what additional guidance meant, but the phrase alone was enough to plunge Westminster into panic. Every newsroom scrambled to confirm the leak. Every political commentator speculated about its meaning. And every viewer watching at home felt the tension ratchet up another level. While Downing Street scrambled, the King remained silent. Buckingham Palace issued no new statements, no clarifications, no reassurances. The silence only increased the pressure. It felt deliberate, strategic, and heavy. A reminder that the King had already spoken clearly, and now it was the government's turn to act. The absence of royal commentary created the loudest noise of all. People began to wonder, had the King lost faith in his Prime Minister? And if so, what came next? Meanwhile, inside Parliament, something unprecedented was unfolding. MPs from both sides gathered privately to discuss a united response to the crisis. For the first time, political rivals agreed on one thing: the country could not stay frozen in uncertainty. Several senior figures insisted the Prime Minister must make a statement before sunset. Not after the palace meeting, not after further debate, but now. They argued that the longer Starmer stayed silent, the more unstable the nation would become. Some ministers even warned that failing to address the public could push the situation toward a constitutional confrontation. Starmer, however, sat alone in his office, staring at the text of the King's message on a printed sheet paper. His hands trembled slightly as he read the final line again and again, searching for meaning, for mercy, for anything he could use to save himself. But the words were crystal clear: immediate reflection, accountability, and reconsideration at the highest level of leadership. A sentence that had now taken on a life of its own, a sentence that people across the UK interpreted as a direct challenge to his authority. As the pressure mounted, Starmer's team finally convinced him to make a private call to Buckingham Palace, but the response they received left the entire room silent. A senior royal aide informed them that the King was fully prepared for their scheduled meeting and would not be moving it, delaying it, or discussing matters beforehand. The message was polite, formal, and ice cold. For Starmer, it was a devastating blow. It meant the King wanted a face-to-face conversation, not excuses, not negotiations, not political spin. And it meant the palace was watching every second of his hesitation. Outside, the crowds grew even larger. People chanted for answers, for leadership, for action. Police lines tightened as emotions intensified. Reporters described the mood as charged and volatile, with many fearing a sudden spark could turn demonstrations into something far more dangerous. Every second of delay felt like another step toward national instability. Then, as afternoon light faded over London, the moment everyone feared arrived. Parliament sources confirmed that multiple senior MPs, including those once closest to Starmer, had formally requested an emergency leadership review. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't defiance, it was survival. For them, for the party, for the country. And the announcement sent shockwaves instantly through social media, through the crowds outside Westminster, and through Downing Street itself. Starmer knew then that he was no longer fighting the opposition. He was fighting the tide of history. The King's warning had triggered something irreversible, a shift in power, a shift in trust, a shift in the nation itself. And as he prepared to leave for Buckingham Palace, surrounded by flashing cameras and rising chants, one truth became impossible to escape. It was a reckoning. The drive to Buckingham Palace felt like the longest journey of Starmer's political life. As his motorcade pushed through crowded streets, the air vibrated with chants, and the relentless flashing of camera lights. Thousands lined the barriers, some demanding answers, others begging for stability. All of them knowing that whatever happened next would determine the future of the nation. Starmer stared out the window, watching the sea of faces blur past, each one reminding him that the ground beneath his leadership had collapsed the moment the King's warning hit the airwaves. Every metre closer to the palace felt like a step closer to judgment. When the gates finally opened and the motorcade rolled inside, the noise of the outside world vanished. The silence was heavy, almost sacred. Starmer stepped out, straightened his jacket and tried to steady his breathing. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was nothing like the